Hi, I'm Justin Colley. Welcome to From Ideas to Innovation, where we bring together the people who study the world and the people who build it to solve today's policy problems.
The biggest national crisis is our excessive government spending. It's not China, it's not Europe, because if we don't get our own fiscal house in order, all those other things are going to be even worse, because now we can't defend ourselves.
Vance Ginn is a nationally recognized economist and one of America's leading advocates for free market policies that promote economic growth, expand opportunity, and ensure fiscal responsibility. His career has been defined by a steadfast commitment to advancing policies that empower individuals, limit government overreach, and foster long-term prosperity. As the founder and president of Ginn Economic Consultant and host of the Let People Prosper Show podcast since 2022, Dr. Ginn collaborates with more than 20 free market organizations countrywide to craft and advocate for pro-growth solutions that impact millions of Americans. His journey to economic leadership was shaped by his early life experiences. Raised in a lower-income, single-mother household in South Houston, Texas, with his dad having epilepsy, Dr. Ginn developed a deep understanding of the struggles that economic policy decisions can impose on families. This first-hand experience fueled his drive to explore solutions that remove government-imposed barriers to success. Through perseverance and hard work, he earned his doctorate in economics from Texas Tech University, same as myself, setting the foundation for a career dedicated to his God-given calling to let people prosper. Richard Morrison is a senior fellow at the Competitive Enterprise Institute, where his work focuses on the relationship between economic and political freedom. He's been widely cited for his research on corporate governance, financial regulation, in particular environmental, social, and governance theory. He is also the host of the Free the Economy podcast. He was previously a senior editor at CEI and managing editor of the blog Open Market. He also served as the program manager for CEI's Center for Advancing Capitalism, where he coordinated outreach to the business community, universities, and other key allies. Before rejoining CEI in 2014, he was manager of communications at the Tax Foundation, where he was also host and producer of the weekly Tax Policy podcast. Prior to that, he served as CEI's Director of Media Relations and Director of New Media between 1999 and 2010, during which he hosted the podcast Liberty Week. He received his Bachelor of Arts in Government from Claremont McKenna College. I'm very excited to have both Vance and Richard on, in part because they've both had me on their podcasts twice, and I really appreciate their insights, and I think they're some of the best voices advancing freedom and liberty in policy right now. Well, Vance and Richard, thank you for joining From Ideas to Innovation.
Oh, thanks. It's great to be here.
Yeah, same.
So, I want to first kind of talk about your lives, because I think y'all both have very interesting background stories and how you got here. And when you got into this, I basically want to ask how you got into this world of economics and policy, and like, when was that kind of light bulb moment for you that you were like, okay, this is something that I really want to get into? So, Richard, you've been at CEI in various roles since 1999. Vance, you grew up in Houston, first-generation college student, even played drums in a rock band. There's a lot of road that you had kind of before your PhD and before your path, and you've had obviously a lot of different paths throughout your life, even post getting your PhD. So we'll start with Richard. Richard, what really shaped you? What was kind of the first moment that you said, all right, this is the stuff that matters to me. This is what I want to spend my career doing?
That's a great question. I think maybe it started with reading Reason magazine when I was in high school. I don't know if they still do this, but a long time ago, they used to get a list of students from the PSAT, the pre-SAT, which you take, a year or two before you go to college. And Reason Magazine used to send free subscriptions to high school students. I believe that was funded by our generous friends, David and Charles Koch at one point. And I started reading that. I was a very sort of precocious lefty in high school. I was a vegetarian. I was an environmentalist. I was a big fan of John Lennon and the song Imagine. Apologies to real rock fans out there. But I was, I read The Nation, and then I got this magazine that kind of out of left field. And it was really kind of surprising and intriguing, and it had all these like new ideas and new angles that wasn't just conservatives on the right say this and liberals on the left say that. Reason, I think this is the era when Virginia Postrel was the editor-in-chief, but the entire history of Reason, they've had sort of left-coded things like drug legalization, and then sort of right-coded things like fiscal responsibility. So I think that kind of got my my brain turning, and then went to a great college, Claremont Mechanic College, that had kind of an emphasis and excellent faculty in politics and economics, government department and economics departments. And then after a semester in DC as a college student, I felt like this was kind of where I wanted to be, that there was the world of ideas and public policy that was exciting. And then even once I got here, and the question, if there's a lot of people come to Washington, D.C. To do entry-level jobs, to be young staffers, and then after a few years, they decide, you know what, I'm going to like move someplace else and get a real job and not do this politics stuff. And I think the first couple of years, what kind of like solidified it to me to be a place I wanted to be, is that it's much more, I think much more than people realize, a real meritocracy of ideas, that if you cultivate some expertise and you do the work, you will be taken seriously. And you don't have to have a fancy terminal degree like Vance, although that's very impressive. You don't have to be a PhD economist in order to have an impact on economic policy. And I think there's lots of great people who've had lots of impressive careers who have proven that if you know your stuff and you do the work, you can get ahead.
Mm-hmm.
What about you, Vance?
Yeah, I was kind of thinking through as Richard was going through that. I guess I didn't necessarily start off as a lefty. I was pretty apolitical through high school and everything else. I went to homeschool from 7th grade through 12th grade. My mom and dad, they were divorced when I was young, so I never really got into politics or policy. I mean, I wanted to be a rock star. That's really what I wanted to do. I was a drummer, and we played a lot of shows in Houston. We would travel around Texas a little bit, and I loved it. And then I got in a bad car accident, and that kind of changed my life to where, okay, I need to do something else. This is not heading in a good direction. And that's when I kind of found economics. And I remember I was at Texas Tech University where I got my PhD, and you did too, Justin.
Very
right?
good choice for a PhD. I would agree.
But when I was there, my mentor, who became my mentor over time, was Dr. Ronald Gilbert, and he handed me Milton Friedman's Capitalism and Freedom, and it changed my world. I was like, man, this makes so much sense. I would watch a little bit about what's going on and be somewhat apprised, but that really started to tell the story of like, okay, this makes a lot of sense to me. I don't like government, just in general, and then it kind of put me on this path to continue learning, get a PhD in economics, and then teach for a couple of years at Sam Houston State University. And I enjoy teaching. I still do. I think I teach a different audience now, but at the time I really enjoyed teaching and giving back to the students. But then there was this whole publish or perish thing. Kind of one of the problems of getting a degree, like Richard was saying, with a PhD, is that's what you're required to do if you want to stay in academia. And I enjoy doing research. Don't get me wrong. I still publish in academic journals, but I wanted to write stuff that people were going to read. No offense to those who are doing that, but I wanted something people were going to read and make a difference.
Hey, there's like 5
now.
people that read my articles. Come on.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And maybe one of them might cite you, but it makes it very difficult to try to get things done now. And I always felt like this calling, like this inside of me, to where I wanted to get things done now. I'm impatient just in general, and so I don't want to wait later on. I want to do it now. And I started working at the Texas Public Policy Foundation in 2013. Worked on a lot of issues there as the only PhD economist on staff. Then worked in President Trump's first administration as chief economist for the Office of Management and Budget, which we could talk about that. I mean, that was up and down. I helped write the president's last budget during the first administration. Then we were in hearings about Ukraine funding over the impeachment stuff, and then COVID hit. And then I saw a lot of talks and going to the Situation Room and everything about, well, we're going to shut down the economy. And I was always like, no, we cannot shut down the economy. You can't put entrepreneurs on the sidelines as we're going through this. And that's the way it went, of course. And so I was like, okay, I got to get out of here, and went back to Texas, spent a couple more years at TPPF, and then started my own thing, Ginn Economic Consulting, 3 years ago, and really love it. I have freedom and flexibility, and I have my own podcast like you're doing here, which is great, and Richard's too, called the Let People Prosper Show, and I love it. I've got 3 kids, and so it keeps me busy. But the policy world is where I'm always wanting to do more of. I try to stay out of DC. So Richard said he was called to go back to DC. I try to stay out as much as possible. But at the same time, I think folks like us are where we've really got to keep pushing the envelope, because there's a lot of economic illiteracy out there right now. There's a lot of populism. There's a lot of things that are taking us away from the principles. And what I hope what we can do is to continue to show the North Star. We may not always get to the seat at the table, but I think those of us who really have a good North Star of where we should be, we need to talk about that more. And so that's why I'm excited about all the work that we're doing here.
Yeah, I love both those answers. I mean, personally, I'm kind of, I guess, a little bit different from both of you in terms of how I got to become more of like kind of a pure free market economist, libertarian. That I grew up, I mean, in a small rural town in south of New Orleans, which most people don't even know is a place that exists south of New Orleans. And I grew up, much more traditionally conservative in that sense. I always considered myself in at least high school, whenever I started kind of caring about politics to some degree, as a conservative, because I thought, well, that's where kind of the freedom movement lies. I was always kind of freedom oriented. And then, over time it was like, well, if you have freedom for these kind of economic liberties, why is that not the case for like a lot of these personal liberties as well? And that's when, again, Reason Magazine was also one of those that kind of really pushed the envelope and really got me thinking about freedom as a more holistic concept than in like a partisan manner. So Vance, I want to kind of build off of something you said, because you talked about, you've had experiences at the state level and at the federal level. Do you find that a lot of these ideas, or a lot of these economic ideas and kind of the innovations happening at the policy level, do you think that's occurring more at the state level, more at the federal? Where do you kind of see kind of those two having paths in both of those worlds? Where do you see as kind of a lot of the innovations happening in the policy space?
I mean, definitely not in D.C. It just takes so long, right, to get anything done with Congress, an active Congress, right? And I think that's part of what the founders wanted, is that there wanted to be this tension, so we don't have a lot of big things done, which is one of the reasons why I have so much concern about the executive overreach through tariffs and spending. And I mean, you name it, it seems like the Trump administration well, it wasn't just the Trump administration. The Biden administration has done this. Other administrations have, but we've seen the broadening of the executive branch for a number of reasons. And that's why I think states are so important, because the states are kind of the system of federalism, the laboratory of competition. What works, what doesn't. If one state like Texas does it and it works, then maybe Louisiana or other states will try it as well. And I think there's something beautiful about that allows us to see what works and what doesn't. And one thing we're seeing here recently, which is some of the work you've done too, Justin, is about economic mobility and how people move with their feet. If they don't like where they're at, they can move. And I don't know about y'all, but I don't have any interest in moving to another country. I'm an American. I'm a Texan, so I'd rather stay in Texas. But if things get too bad here, and I'm worried actually about what's happening in Texas right now of overspending and overtaxing and everything else, that maybe I want to move to another state. That's easier to do, but it's hard to do that when the entire country is moving in a bad direction, whether it be policy from social or economic sort of issues that we've got to make sure we keep track of. But I think people in Congress and the president should really learn from the states of what works well and what doesn't. So I think the innovation is certainly there at the state level, even at the local level. I think that's ultimately too where you really want to look at. Slow things happen in DC, and I think less should be happening there, honestly.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think for better or for worse, innovation is happening at the state level. And that could either be kind of some of these really bad ideas, like we're seeing in terms of wealth taxes in California or the millionaire's tax in Washington state, but also some of the really good innovations, like you're seeing kind of this push towards lowering the income tax rates across a lot of these Gulf South states, particularly. And this is because of states that innovated like Texas, Florida, and Tennessee that reduced theirs and made theirs zero. Well, now other states are trying to catch up because they're losing ground, right? People are moving to those states. I mean, in Louisiana, for example, where I'm from and where I live, we've seen a lot of people move, particularly to Texas and Florida and Tennessee and even Georgia. But what really got people kind of concerned and really kind of put the fire alarm on, is when people started. We have a net out migration rate with Mississippi, and that's kind of like a sign of like, okay, we got to fix some things in Louisiana if people are leaving from Mississippi. We'll handle, okay, if you want to move to Texas, we get it. That makes sense. If you want to move to Mississippi over us, we start getting offended a little bit. So Richard, off of this point, so CEI obviously is one of the more consistently free market institutions that DC has had. So you've watched administrations come and go, regulatory climates shift dramatically, unfortunately, usually in kind of this increasing manner. So what would you say is kind of like the through line of your work or the CEI's work? What does the institution believe that it's kind of never stopped believing, despite all of the moving parts of DC and kind of all of the different administrations and different types of even within the same administration throughout your entire time there?
Right. Well, you're right that administrations have come and gone, and a lot of different policy teams have had their chance to play at writing national policy, and different Congresses have passed all kinds of different laws, but it does end up feeling a little bit like Groundhog Day after a while, where it's a lot of the same interest groups pushing a lot of the same not great ideas. So there's always a new press release on any given day, but there are very few actually new ideas. One of the things that I think animates, CEI, we do a lot of work on, economic regulation, and our founder, Fred Smith, was really wanted people to focus on the sort of neglected part of policymaking, which is all the executive branch agencies, the so-called alphabet agencies, the FTC, the SEC, FCC, all those that are known by their acronyms, because back in the in the mid 1980s when we started, everyone and today, so to a certain extent, it's similar as well. Everyone wants to do the big, sexy things, which is, defense and foreign policy, taxes and budgets, right? It shows you how much of a nerd we are that taxes and budget is the sexy part, but it's the thing that people know about, right? Because people pay taxes. It's at least a part of legislating and government's work that seems to actually get covered. All of the stuff that gets published in the Federal Register every week, nobody knows about that. But by the 1980s, it was having billion-dollar effects on the U.S. economy, like just those regulations, not even the laws that Congress was passing. So, one of our themes has been, pay attention to that wonky stuff that's buried in the details, because that's going to have an impact on your life and your future and the prosperity of the country in a way that a lot of people don't think about. But also that economic freedom is freedom, period, full stop. And the idea that some people have, which is, we're not going to abridge your freedom of speech, we're just going to tell your social media company what comments they can post and can't post. Like, well, no, those are the same thing, actually. You can't separate the true freedom that every American deserves to enjoy in their life and say, oh, but it's only going to affect your money. Well, that's kind of an important part of our lives, right? And money is fungible utility. It gives you the opportunity to live out your values in any number of ways, whether it's where you live, how you provide for your kids, what you donate to. All of these things are expression of our truest selves, and they're real freedom, not some kind of second best, just for greedy people freedom. So, that's a theme that I always try and get people to remember when we say, like, oh, well, it'll only just be, a bunch of billionaires who have to pay this. No, minutely regulating every aspect of our lives, as the deep state and the executive branch are sometimes ambitiously attempt to do, is absolutely an infringement on our freedom in the most important way. And then just sort of wrap that angle up, I would say that there's two main ways that you can approach these policy issues. You can approach them in the sort of practical way, which is like, is this particular policy going to have a specific good outcome? So that's kind of the utilitarian way. Or is this policy just, or is it unjust? And if we're being fancy, we can call that the deontological argument, right? And so we don't often announce in advance which of these two major motives we have. And sometimes if you squint at someone's article, you can tell they're probably making one or the other. But I've always said that we are motivated by both, right? We believe economic freedom delivers the best results for people everywhere across the globe. We've seen that, since The Wealth of Nations was written in 1776. We've seen that since the collapse of communism in 1989 and 91. But we also believe it is the best right and just policy to allow people to do whatever they want with their money, as long as they're not directly hurting someone else. So, we think freedom is important, and we think freedom to do what you want with your money is important, both for practical reason and just for a philosophical reason.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's absolutely fantastic kind of background, and I completely agree with everything you just said there, especially with respect to, the freedom of speech and social media, for example, that it's like, oh, well, we just want to regulate the social media companies and, the speech that they have. It's like, well, if X isn't actually, or Instagram or Facebook are not actually putting out information, they're a place where other people are putting out information. So you're not really regulating them. You're really regulating the people who are using those sites in the first place. So it's not the same. I mean, it's directly an attack on freedom of speech, for example.
Well, if I could just add too to that, I mean, I think, one thing I think about CEI, or Richard's at too, is consistency. And in DC right now, from my perspective, some of that's lacking from some of the other institutions that are there. And I'm seeing more of this across the states too, to where there's more of this populism, and this post-liberal and NatCon sort of direction that I'm seeing. And it's been great to see like Richard and others there, Kent Lastman and others at CEI who have really held that consistency. And I wonder if that's probably been tough sometimes, but it's wonderful to see that there are people who want to continue to that consistency. So keep that going.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think it is very easy, to play the political game in DC or really anywhere, right? To where, yes, we have these kind of general principles, but it's very easy to, have there's a lot of incentive to like, okay, well, if we just kind of ignore these on the side, we can make a lot of headway and get a lot of publicity or a lot of movement within the current administration. And you're definitely seeing that a lot in DC and across different states. And so, yeah, I think that's one of the best things about CEI and other institutions in DC that, have the same core principles, and those principles don't change depending on who's in the administration. And I love that. So you both you both have and you do work on a lot of different policy areas. But if someone asked you to name the single issue where you feel like your work has made the most concrete difference or the biggest impact, a real world outcome that you can point to, for example, what would you say? And we'll start with Richard.
Yeah, that was a fascinating. This is a fascinating question, of course, and an important one, especially if you work for a nonprofit organization that has to raise its budget every year. Often, your supporters and donors are going to ask you that same question. I think for CEI, one of the most important ones is sort of confronting the sort of climate alarmism and being a sort of hopefully cooler head, level head, and looking at climate energy policy with a skeptical and kind of realist lens. If we had taken the advice of the climate activist movement 25 years ago, we would be in a terrible situation now, right? The weather would be the same, but our economy would be a shambles, and energy would be extremely expensive. And that would, as our progressive friends always like to remind us, have hurted the poorest in the world the most, because they would be least able to afford and absorb the higher prices of energy, and then everything else in society that is based on the ability to make, manufacture, distribute things with affordable energy. So, that's what I think is a huge legacy. I don't think our friends in the environmental movement will give us a lot of credit for it, unfortunately. But the reality is there. If I could go back in time to when I first came to Washington, D.C., I would double down on telling everyone not to be a panicking about climate change, and definitely, at the very least, don't try to flush the modern industrial economy down the toilet because you're worried about the high temperature 100 years from now being 2.3% higher. The other thing that, CEI has done a lot of work on over the years, I think that, it's easier to see where the kind of rubber hits the road is Food and Drug Administration, FDA reform, where, the FDA, in a way, it's sort of understandable that these incentives, ended up the way they were. You have an incentive always to say no rather than yes, right? Because if you as a government regulator approve some new technology that hurts someone, then you get in big trouble because they say, oh, look, this drug ended up having a side effect we didn't know about and you're responsible for that. But if you delay or kill a drug that could have helped millions of people, there's no story. There's no headline, and you don't get in trouble, even though millions of people have been harmed because they don't have access to this thing that would have been good and valuable and important for them. So, from the very beginning, from the 1980s, CEI put out a press release, I think in 1988, where we were backing the ACT UP AIDS protesters who were protesting at the FDA headquarters because they wouldn't release, I think it was AZT at the time as a treatment for HIV infection. Going all the way back then, we've said we want informed consent, right? We want people to know if there's an experimental drug, what the risks are, as much as the research has been able to show up to that point. But we think people and doctors, especially, should have more freedom in prescribing and recommending medical treatments. And to the extent that we've now had policies, things like what's called right to try, there are more permission is given for experimental drugs to be used for people with, severe illnesses. The fact that we now have an FDA, which is somewhat better, by no means perfect, and more people are getting access to cutting edge drugs, I think is excellent. And I count us on the long list, very much admittedly a long list of advocates who have been trying to push the FDA in the right direction.
Yeah, well, I have to applaud you for that, because I do think that is one of the bigger concerns that people don't really talk about, is this type 1, type 2 errors when trying to make some of these policy decisions. And no one wants to be the person who, approves this drug that ends up, having these side effects that hurts people. But at the same time, like you mentioned, no one's going to notice directly if you don't approve a drug that actually was totally fine and could have saved a bunch of lives in the first place. So I think, especially, in the right to try for people with, kind of in these very dire circumstances who just need to try something because what's currently available isn't going to work or isn't going to actually solve what they want to do. I mean, I think that's an incredibly important aspect, and I think that type of type 1, type 2 error thinking leads to a lot of really kind of bad decisions across the outside of the FDA. I think you see this in potential central banking, for example. Where, we saw this during the Great Recession, where it's well, you don't want to be the person who didn't do anything, because then people are going to blame you for not doing anything. So you have to try something, and this is something. It might not be perfect, but it's something, and then they try it, and then sometimes, oftentimes it doesn't actually work in the first place. So I think that type of pushing that type of envelope in those directions, I think, is incredibly important work. Vance, what about you? You've obviously talked about a lot of different policies throughout your time, and again at the state level and at the federal level.
Yeah. It reminded me too when we're talking about Bastiat's the seen versus the unseen, right? That's oftentimes what's missed in so many different policies. I don't know. These days I work on a lot of different policies, which makes it a lot of fun. I got into AI and tech because that's the growing issue, AI revolution, and there's a lot of pushback on data centers and everything else. And so I'm hopeful that my work will have an impact in that space over time. But I think if I look at going back to 2013, starting at TPPF and then working in the White House and things like that, it has to do probably with government spending. I mean, that's really been my bread and butter is fiscal rules. Let's have something that restrains the growth of government. And you don't want to just look at taxes. That's a symptom of the disease of spending. If you don't keep your eye on spending, as Friedman says, you're not looking at the size of government. And so I really tried to focus in a lot on government spending, reining in the total amount of spending. And so been looking at population growth plus inflation, for example, or different metrics to use on that, and started kind of this movement of responsible budgeting, sustainable budgeting, where I've worked with about 15 different think tanks to create their own responsible budget, where they're saying, look, the government's going to come out with their own budget, but here are the top line numbers that you shouldn't go above. And using that as a messaging tool to say, if you go above this, then You're excessively spending taxpayer money. And what that does is, in my view, is it helps to really channel, because sometimes you talk about these hundreds of billions of dollars, or at the federal level, trillions of dollars in their budget of $7 trillion is what the federal budget is now. And that most people can't recognize or relate to what that amount of money is, right? I can't. I wish I did, but I can't. But when you start breaking it down, like in per capita terms, or how does this relate to inflation or the size of the economy, I think that starts to connect them more with it. And even better is if you can show how much is affecting per family. Well, what's the average cost for a family of 4 of their government, right? That really brings it home, because now when they're looking at their budgeting for the year, you got to think about how much taxes you're paying. But it also infiltrates many other areas of our economy. When the government spends money on healthcare, it is crowding out the private sector money that could be going into that. It's crowding out your choices, because they are then directing where that money and where those resources should go, which is taking away your freedoms, like Richard was saying, on regulations and everything else. But if they're not spending it, it's hard to regulate it. If they're not spending it, we don't have to tax it. And so I think going back to spending is just so important. But it's also gotten me into a lot of other key areas, because if you're talking about budgets and you're not talking about healthcare, well, you can't really talk about much of the budget, because that's usually, at least half, if not more than that for most budgets. If you're talking about education, especially at the state level, that's another half of the budget. You've got to be looking at that. And so I've been, trying to champion school choice and things like of that nature. And so I think it's gotten me into a place where I love talking about all these things as an economist and someone who really wants limited government as much as possible. But how do we start to not only look at the top line, which is spending limits, and then looking at the silos of how do we make these reforms that are going to allow for people to prosper the most? And typically, right, that's getting government out of the way. We need some government. I think some of us, like free market types, talk about the bad parts of government. I'm not an anarchist. I'm not an anarcho-capitalist. I'm a libertarian, lowercase libertarian. Classical liberal is usually what I like to say. So I do believe that there are some roles for government, just very limited. Make sure that there's some order, national defense, maybe a police. I think we probably spend too much on those things now, but it's there. You need a justice system where you have a courts that are going to uphold what's going on, because it's difficult as individuals to make those choices, although they could, I guess. And then maybe there's a few public goods. But besides that, I don't really see roles for government, because otherwise they're crowding out what people should be doing in the productive private sector. And it reminds me of, where Thomas Sowell talked about there are no solutions, only trade-offs. I think that's important for us to remember. But also, if people were angels, we wouldn't need government, right? We're not angels, so there's going to be some form of government. But let's also remember, going back to public choice arguments, that those people in government are also not angels. and they oftentimes will exceed what their powers will be, because that's what their incentives are. That's what their marginal benefits and marginal costs are, because they want to win re-election. And so that takes them off. Talking about consistency earlier with CEI and Richard earlier, it's one of the big reasons why it's difficult for politicians to stay consistent with why they came in with their principles, because there's so many other avenues that they want to go in order to win re-election and have that rent seeking that's happening. But in my view, it all starts with the spending, and so I'm going to keep hammering away at that, because just to end on this point on this question is, in my view, the biggest national crisis is our excessive government spending. It's not China, it's not Europe, because if we don't get our own fiscal house in order, all those other things are going to be even worse, because now we can't defend ourselves. And so I think it's something that we've really got to keep hammering.
Yeah, I think a few points on that I think are quite interesting is, one, I think, the fiscal aspect is absolutely important, especially at a federal level, that we've seen just this immense, kind of growth in the budget. I mean, for example, like during COVID, there was a lot of, reasonable arguments for needing more government spending during the time of COVID. But yet we're past COVID, and our spending is still higher than it was pre-COVID. We never went back to that kind of post or pre-COVID trend line. We're still spending well beyond that. So there's nothing more permanent than a temporary government program, right? There's a lot of incentives to keep it, a lot of incentives to have that kind of stay there. So I do think that's incredibly important. And Vance, I'll have to give you credit on this. I mean, if you look at after you left TPPF, Texas started getting spending problems. You left the White House. federal government started having spending problems. I mean, there's definitely something to what you're saying here in terms of as soon as you leave a place, the spending issues become a problem for sure. So I think there's a lot of interesting nuggets there, but I want to build on kind of why we're all here in the first place, which is, I'm very new to the, hosting a podcast game, but both of you have been doing this for a while now. And, this is one of the reasons I wanted to have both of you on, is to kind of talk about how do you see this as an avenue for communicating ideas? Because I think at the end of the day, right, one of the reasons that we are not none of us are in a traditional academic route per se is because we like communicating ideas to broader audiences. And a lot of people, and all three of us do this, we have a Substack, we have op-eds, people do white papers, congressional testimony. There's a lot of different ways to communicate ideas. But while doing that, you've both invested a lot of time and effort into podcasting. So what convinced you that it was worth doing, and what does it let you do that sort of traditional policy writing doesn't in that sense? And Vance, let's start with you.
Yeah. It's interesting about, I guess it was 2017 or 2018, before I went to the White House and everything, I started my YouTube channel and called it the Let People Prosper Show. And I would be on a whiteboard in my office at TPPF and just write out things. And, because I wanted to share this information because honestly, like I said earlier, I'm a teacher at heart. So now I just want to teach a broader audience than just in a classroom, right? And so I started it then. And then it wasn't until I left TPPF and then started my own, with Ginn Economic Consulting, where I was like, okay, I really want to make this an important part of what I'm doing. And I have two shows. I have one channel, Let People Prosper channel, but I have two shows every week. One is the Let People Prosper Show, where I bring on a guest and interview someone and talk about different topics. And then I have another one, This Week's Economy, that comes out every Monday, where I talk about what's going on in the economy and other key topics. Richard, I'm sure will talk about this, but he kind of puts it all together, which is another good idea that maybe I need to implement sometime soon. But I think it goes back to your point, though, Justin, where I really just wanted to share more thoughts. And I love learning. Like, I love asking questions. In fact, if I was to go talk to my wife right now, she would say, you ask too many questions. But to me, that's how we learn. And what better way to be able to do it to bring on guests of friends and people who I admire and be able to ask them questions and talk about these things and then share it with a broader audience. I've been kind of blessed to be able to work with different folks who have helped me out with my social media and podcasting and branding, to where now I have about 50,000 followers and subscribers across different channels, to where whenever I'm putting out something, I believe it's going to high quality people that are going to read it, take it in, many policymakers. And in that way, I'm having more of an influence on what's happening out there compared to some of the longer white papers that I write, which I still do. I still think there's some importance with that. But how better to do it than this new age in the 21st century of being able to do podcasting and posting in all these different platforms and share it on social media. And, we're parts of different groups where we can share it with each other and then they can share it. And then you reach even more people. I mean, it's really fascinating, the situation that we're in. And I would argue that we're at the cusp of this new precipice to where more and more people are going to be doing this. Like you, Justin, you're just getting started, and I'm excited for you and all the stuff that you're going to do here, because now whenever I go to conferences, people are reaching or, come and talk to me where I didn't even know, are saying, I love your show. And I say, well, what do you like about it? And they'll be like, well, I like how you dig into different concepts and help me understand what's going on. And to me, that's what I really want to do, is to help people learn while I'm learning along the way. And so I love it, and I hope to keep doing it for a long time. I'm almost up to episode 200 for my Let People Prosper show, and then episode 160 on This Week's Economy show. So that's a lot of podcasts to record, and I'm still learning new things as I go.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that's important about, using this as a potential tool, as well as all these other kind of outlets, like you said, the white papers, op-eds, traditional Substack, is that, there's different audiences for each of those, right? So the white papers, these are not expected to be read by, tens of thousands of people, right? The expectation is it's for you want to be able to, communicate your idea across in a very, in a somewhat succinct manner, but in still a way that shows the depth and quality of the work and shows that this results aren't just, kind of my thoughts kind of written out on pages, that there's some reason and there's some logic, and whether that's an empirical analysis or qualitative data that, shows what are some of the impacts of this potential policy or the policy that actually happened, and trying to assess them to make sure other states or federal governments don't implement them. Right? It's all about different audiences for different people. And I think that's one thing that, at least, I'm trying to do, I think y'all two do very, very well, is, try to communicate these ideas to audiences that otherwise would not see it. And I think that's one of the most crucial points. So Richard, what about you? What kind of motivated you to get into this podcasting world, and why do you think it's so important in the ideas space?
I think there's nothing magical about podcasting as a platform, right? Because it's just digital audio files on an RSS feed, so you can put anything you want into that format. But the question is, why do people find it interesting? Why do so many people watch it? And why do so many millions of more than ever before, listen to and watch content like this? And I think it's timely, it's engaging. A lot of advice on podcasts about how to grow your podcast, which is stuff I read all the time. Go to conferences, and everyone's always trying to get more listeners and downloads and views. And a lot of it has to do with whoever the host, and then on shows with guests, whoever the guests are, having a person look you in the eye, look in the camera, or speak into your earbuds and explain something to you is often both more interesting and more effective at you learning it than just reading it on a page or reading it on a screen. So it's more like a conversation and less like a textbook. And so people, I know obviously people like it a lot for that reason. Also, we're really deep into the era of multitasking, right? We have people who, unfortunately, some of them even pull out their phones during when they're watching a movie or at a lecture. But at the very least, most of us now in this day and age, whatever generation we were born into, are frequently multitasking with different kinds of media at the same time. I have my TV in my office here to my left of where I'm sitting right now is usually on CNBC. I have all sorts of information on my screen, and I sometimes even then still pick up my phone to see what notifications are. And some people would sort of decry that and say, you should be sitting in a small stone room reading a book and doing nothing else. But if we notice and be cognizant of the way people actually use and consume media now, they are multitasking, and podcasts are great for that because you can have it on when something else is going on. You can have it on, not necessarily where you're consuming two different streams of media, but you can certainly have it on while you are going for a walk, while you're at the gym, while you're cleaning your kitchen, while you are, giving your toddlers the bath before they go to bed at night. So podcasting fits into modern people's lifestyles pretty well. And I would say one of the kind of inspiring things about me, while at the same time we have, whether it's someone like, Jonathan Haidt saying it's bad that kids are on their phones all the time and that like modern social media technology is like making us dumber or a worse society. If you look at some of the most popular podcasts, they are on, what you might call nonfiction content, right? Not just entertainment content. Look at and some of it is really valuable. It's really deep. It's really good stuff, right? We don't read as many newspapers as we used to. I certainly don't. But that drive to be informed, podcasting is sort of filling that niche in a lot of people's lives. Look at like one of the top podcasts there is Stanford Professor Andrew Huberman, who has lots of episodes about health and wellness and medical issues. He's one of the top podcasters in the world, and he has people who are microbiologists and neurologists talking for 3 hours about protein synthesis. I mean, this is something Mr. Science from 30 years ago could only dream that people on their own, with no one's forcing them, no one's giving them credit for it, no one's grading them on this. They're listening to this valuable, pretty high level content on their own, and so I would just say for some of the people who see things in decline in America, like I said, we don't read as many newspapers, or some people don't read as many books. I think there are that there are places where that same good, valuable, kind of hard, chewy information is out there that is being consumed. The people who are being kind of doomers about it, maybe they're just not subscribed to the right shows.
Yeah. And Justin, that you wouldn't think, because remember back in the day, I mean, you try to keep it to like 40 minutes or 30 minutes, like shorter. I try to keep mine now to about 45 minutes. But man, we have like Joe Rogan or this other guy he just mentioned before going on for like 3 hours. And these folks have like millions of subscribers and everything else. I mean, I've been listening to Russ Roberts. I can't even remember when it started, but I know he started in 2006 with Econ Talk. I started somewhere around there, but I've heard so many conversations with him, which he subtitles it Conversations for the Curious, right? Which are pretty nerdy stuff. But I love it because I really am able to grasp what's going on. And that's one reason why I love listening to podcasts. I mean, whether you watch it or listen to it or whatever else, there's always something to learn and grasp. And I agree with what Richard's saying is that I think we're right now on the precipice of seeing more people do it. And hopefully we'll have been in the starting line of the policy narratives and everything else so we can make sure that we have our voice heard throughout this process.
I just want to sneak in one more point at the end here, and that is that one of the advantages of digital content and something like a podcast that's hosted online, you access through apps and websites, is that it can also connect you to all kinds of other stuff, right? So for any given show, say you cover 5 topics, you write up your show notes and you put in links to all of the things that you talked about, and so it's a way for someone who is interested in a topic to easily click through and say, oh, here's the stuff they talked about, here's that author they mentioned, or who's Thomas Sowell, maybe I need to look him up. Or I'll just click straight through to Amazon.com and Basic Economics, the book. I can just buy it with one click right there and start reading it immediately. The way that the underlying technology allows these shows to be a kind of nexus where you can go back and forth and explore more topics, I think is really great. It's something that the old school talk radio, as great as it was for a lot of people, didn't have that ability to guide you to uptake to all the other resources and deep dives and things like that. But the podcasting format or the video version on YouTube, you absolutely can. And so it's a sort of real life index to the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for starters, to kind of lead into this question, I'll say that your 2 podcasts are 2 of my favorite podcasts. And I'm not just saying that because you've both had me on twice. And you're here right now. But I am curious to hear, what would you say is your favorite kind of econ policy side podcast and your favorite, non-economics podcast, or just kind of what I guess people would call normal podcast outside of the kind of wonkier things that we tend to do?
I think for me, I was trying to think. I mean, I've listened to so many of them now that it makes it a little bit difficult. But I would think probably, I don't know, Econ Talk with Russ Roberts is probably my favorite one as far as economics, and he talks a lot about a lot of other issues these days. I like Freakonomics, right? Because it kind of breaks up the normal things that we talk about, but there's a lot of good information on there as well. I think there's also a lot within the public policy world. I mean, with Richard's Free the Economy and now yours and other ones that are going on, there's just a lot of information. I know Iowans for Tax Relief Foundation has a good one where they talk about what's going on in Iowa that I listen to pretty often. But I think there's just so many now. It makes it interesting. But I do think that Econ Talk is probably my favorite one. Is from like just economic the discussion that's happening. And then probably Freakonomics. I know that's still economic related, but I think it kind of veers outside of that sometimes as well.
Yeah. What about you, Richard?
It seems like every think tank and advocacy group has a podcast now, and so just like I'll let go Vance and say it's hard to choose just one or 2, but I'll do it anyway. The Mackinac Center has a show called The Overton Window, which is great.
Yeah.
I bet a lot of people did not realize that someone from the Mackinac Center created that phrase, Overton Window, Joe Overton, who works for them. So it makes sense that something that has gotten so deep into the zeitgeist of culture has become the title of their podcast. The Reason Roundtable is great. I know the Reason editors do usually a 4-person roundtable about stuff that's been in the news that week. That's very popular. The Cato Institute's podcast series is also great. Used to be hosted every episode by Caleb Brown, who is now the president of the Bluegrass Institute in Kentucky. Now I think the Cato scholars take turns hosting. And then, outside of the realm of sort of, politics and public policy and government and econ, I like, this year I started listening to Daily Scripture with Tim Wildsmith, which is where he reads through 365th of the Bible in every episode. So if you listen to it for a whole year, you'll hear the whole Bible over the course of a year. There's a lot of churches that have done reading plans like that. He's just doing it in podcast form. I love All the Hacks, which is about personal finance and credit card points and miles and travel and all that sort of stuff. Like I said, the Andrew Huberman podcast is also great if you're interested in. Huberman is a professor at Stanford School of Medicine. He interviews all sorts of really fascinating people doing cutting-edge biomedical research. So if you want advice on how to be fitter, healthier, happier, he can give you that too.
I love that. I would agree on many of those points in terms of favorite podcast. I like Econ Talk was one of the first ones that got me into economics in the first place. Like when I started kind of caring about economics when I took it in college, started listening to Econ Talk, and that was one. Reason Roundtable is usually my go-to if I'm on a flight and I just want to listen to something while I'm on a plane. I'll download the episode and listen to it as well. I love Cato Daily with Caleb Brown as well. I'm a kind of a sports nerd, so I really like sports podcast. So I really like, Bill Simmons has a great sports podcast, and Nick Wright, who works for Fox Sports 1, he has a great podcast that I listen to. But yeah, also, a lot of these kind of, I'm also really weirdly into like Crime Junkie podcast every once in a while. Those are pretty interesting. All right, well, kind of moving away from podcasting more to, what I'll call the era of abundance. And at least, I think the era of abundance is at least being talked about in a way that I don't believe it has been in quite some time. I don't know how much, I think this was even happening before Derek Thompson and Ezra Klein's book came out, even though that obviously helped even people more on the center left kind of push for this abundance agenda. I know, in kind of similar circles, both Richard and Vance, you've talked about, abundance and prosperity and opportunity. Do you think that's correct? Do you think like this era of abundance is kind of, do you accept the framing in the first place? Do you think it's here to stay? Do you think, people are really kind of pushing towards it? And what do you think would be, if you had to pick one policy that you think is going to be the most crucial in determining this kind of era of abundance? What policy would that be? And, why do you think that? So let's start with Richard on this one.
Yeah, I think the idea of abundance as a frame of looking at things is having a moment, as we say, but also is something that is going to be a long-term way that we're going to sort of guide policy and guide people towards supporting better policies. So I remember seeing, I think it was at an event hosted by the Breakthrough Institute, where Derek Thompson was there talking about these ideas. I think this is even before the book came out. I think this is when he was working on the book. So that was a few years ago. I would say one of my recent podcast guests, Gail Pooley, co-wrote a book with Marion Tupy in 2022 called Superabundance. So he was one-upping them, Derek and Ezra, even before their book came out. There's a lot of ways of approaching this, and so there's a sort of centrist way, there's sort of a center-left way, and then there's a sort of center-right conservative libertarian way of saying why this is a good idea and why we need policies that are organized around this theme. For me, it's mostly about getting the government out of the way so that the people who want to satisfy the desires of people for those basic goods can do so in the most efficient way possible. My old boss, Fred Smith, who also from South Louisiana, he liked to say, when it comes to, in terms of the economy, we don't have to teach the grass to grow. We just have to move the rocks off the lawn. And and that's a kind of folksy shorthand way of him looking at the entire economy and civil society. But I think it works here too. So people, and when it comes to sort of selling this politically, how do you get people on board and be excited about this idea? You like I said, you can sell it to people in a conservative or libertarian or liberal way, a progressive way. I think there's arguments for people from all of those backgrounds supporting an abundance agenda and framework. But you can also sell it to the most important voters in America, which are the non-ideological, non-aligned voters, the normie people who are not obsessed with politics, right?
Yeah.
Because most people aren't ideologues. Most people aren't conservative or liberal or progressive or any of these other things. What they want is affordable healthcare, education, housing, transportation. They want to be able for their kids to go to college without permanently mortgaging their future. They just want stuff to work and be around and accessible. And that's what an abundance framework, if it actually works, that's what it can deliver. So you don't have to say, well, you should support this because of this X, Y, and Z ideological reason, or you're going to really own the libs or own the MAGAs or win the culture war if you get on the bandwagon here. The pitch is, this is just going to make life better for everyone. And so if people who have companies that make products and services, if it's easier for them to make those basic products and services that people need and want, then that is a good outcome. And I think that is what, properly understood, an abundance framework can give us.
Yeah, I agree there. I think, if you ask pretty much everybody, it's like, hey, would you like, the ability to afford more things, whether that's, for pure starters, basic necessities, things that everybody just wants to work and have it be affordable, housing, healthcare, education, just kind of the basic transportation, just the basic things people want to get right. But people also like, having kind of the disposable income to, save for the future, because the more you have to spend now on housing and all this stuff, that mortgages your future in many different ways. People want to be able to go on vacation or take time off and actually, see family and friends if they live away from family, or just go see a new place, experience the beautiful world we have around us. And I'd say for the vast majority of people, I guess, aside from, I guess, these kind of super hardline degrowthers who really, think like, no, you will have less and you will be happy with it and you will like it. I think for the vast majority of normies, as you said, that's a good framing, right? People want to be able to afford more things. And that's not just to be able to splurge on random stuff or, be able to afford the nicest, go to the most hipster, nicest, expensive coffee shops. They just want to be able to afford normal, basic, everyday to day things. So I do think that abundance framing matters a lot and is going to kind of push us forward into this kind of next phase, and where a lot of people, people on the center left, center right, pure centrist, libertarians, liberals, conservatives all have kind of their own ideas of what leads us to that. I think we all have kind of I'd say we all have very similar framings around it personally, and of what is actually going to get us to that point. But just the idea of having, a better life, I think everyone can get on board with. I don't think it's something that's too controversial, and I think that's one of the things that's going to make this type of movement, potentially stick better than a lot of the other movements that we've seen. Vance, what about you? What do you think is going on with the abundance era? Where do we go from here? What matters for it? What's kind of your kind of calling card? Or you're like, this is the thing that matters. This is the thing that's going to drive us into the future.
Yeah, no, those are all great points. And it's tough sometimes as an economist because we think about the world in terms of scarcity, right? Because if there wasn't scarcity, we may not have economics, because then how are we optimizing? How are we looking at trade-offs? There wouldn't need to be trade-offs. So there is scarcity, and kind of the flip side of that is abundance. So there's some tension there, I think, as an economist and somebody looking at these things where you want to economize. So how can there be abundance? But I think y'all hit on a lot of good points there is, I hope that we do have abundance because we want more. We want to continue to have more. And as a Christian, I happen to believe that God wanted more for us, right, than just the scarcity, that we want to be fruitful and multiply. It doesn't say that we should just, continue to have constraints and not multiply and stay as one. We want to continue to grow. And so I think it's something for us as humans and as people to be able to use our minds and have these conversations to continue to improve things. And so I think, like y'all were saying too, across the political spectrum, we all want things to improve. We want some form of abundance. It becomes maybe a question of what are the means with which we get there? And what are the trade-offs that we're willing to take in order to get to that place? And so some of the stuff that I've read by Ezra Klein or Gail Pulley and others about this are very different on their approaches on how we get to abundance. Because there's an argument to state that if we can have more abundance if the government just spends more money. Right? Is that the private sector is failing, quote unquote, market failures. And so we need the government to step in to do more of that so we can be more abundant. We can have more health care. All this stuff sounds good. But then the trade-off is where does that money come from? And it has to come from people's pockets to give them less resources to achieve their desires, as Richard put it so well. And so that has this trade-off, this additional tension that's going on. And so my hope or my North Star or narrative that I'm trying to provide is to let people prosper, which is really just to get government out of the way. Because that prosperity comes from many ways. I think abundance does too. In my view, I don't want to just look at material abundance. That's helpful. We need things, we need money in order to exchange and have, transportation and the things that y'all mentioned earlier. But at the same time, I think about it as being a spiritual abundance, a family, a familial abundance. There's just so many different aspects of our lives. If we just narrow it down to one thing, I think we're going to miss out on what so much more has in store for us in this life. And for better or worse, we're only here for a short period of time in the long run scheme of things. And hopefully none of us die tomorrow or today, but we never know. And so I think by giving those sort of constraints, that scarcity of time, let's make sure that we're as abundant as possible. And there's plenty of evidence, even going back to 1776, where we're celebrating 250 years this year of The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith, also our independence, right, as Americans. And I can't help but be a little bit worried about some of the things that I see out there of so much doom and gloom and the degrowthers, as you mentioned, and others of having more government in our lives is not, and I see this across the political spectrum. In Texas, they're continuing to want to, ban this, spend more on that. And so it's not just in the blue states, it's in the red states as well. And it's something we've got to keep pushing forward to say, you know what, why shouldn't government give nothing a chance? Too often, they feel like they need to do something. But what if they do nothing and allow for people in the marketplace to learn? One of the beauties, really, of a free market is that you have profit and loss. And as soon as the government gets in the way and intervenes, whether it's regulation or spending or taxes, they change up those incentives because now we don't have a market-based prices to allow for profit and loss, whether that's individually or as a business, is that it's someone else is putting their thumb on the scale to force us in a different direction, which changes all of our other patterns and behaviors and everything else. And so I like the framing of abundance, but I just think that we got to be cautious because we still live in a world of scarcity, and we've got to understand that government is not the way forward. It's people, it's freedom, and government should be limited in its ways so that we can be abundant as possible.
Yeah. I think that those are great points. And yeah, like obviously, when thinking about this abundance framework, it's still understanding within a world of, I think if we understand it properly, it's still understanding it in a world of relative scarcity, but hopefully that relativeness is lower, as we've grown. We've seen this obviously through kind of this hockey stick of economic growth throughout human history. But I think those are all great important points, especially kind of the kind of pure, if you look at purely from an economic sense or from a monetary sense, I guess would be a better way to say that. We might miss some other types of abundance throughout our whole lives, right? You want to make sure the holistic person is doing well. Obviously, if you're doing well economically, if you see, there's a huge relationship between wealth and happiness across countries, even within individuals. But try to have that kind of more holistic, full life satisfaction prospect obviously matters a lot. So I want to ask two final questions, somewhat brief, but feel free to take it and run with it as you see fit. Because one, kind of building on this, is obviously AI. And AI is throwing, it's kind of the wild card in all of this. It could massively accelerate productivity and abundance, can possibly provide, opportunities for people, have better access to medical care or medical innovation, legal expenses, can provide massive, kind of abundance or abilities and productivity in that. And there's a lot of other sectors that I don't think we've even come to realize, right? But it could also be, captured by incumbents and regulators in ways that could throttle it. Also, there's obviously people who believe that AI is going to kind of replace us all in such a way that it's basically, in such a super abundant manner that now no one has jobs anymore, and now we're just trying to figure out what to do with our time. So there's kind of a whole lot of, dart throwing about guessing what is the impact of AI going to be on our lives. What is your biggest hopes and fears about how AI interacts with policies over the coming 5-10 years, both at the state or federal level? Richard, let's start with you.
Yeah, I think there is enormous amount of promise with artificial intelligence, supercomputing applications out there, but there's also a lot of hype, right? People look at the valuations of some of the leading AI companies and say, "Oh gosh, how could they possibly be justified? What's the long-term return going to be to investors?" And it's possible some of them are overvalued, but that's what market processes are for, and we'll figure that out. The same thing was true of railroads in the 19th century. Both in the UK and the US, there were booms and busts of railroad investment. Does that mean railroads were some sort of investment scam? No, it was the most important industrial technology of the 19th century, right? It's just that in certain times and places, more capital was chasing the available productivity than can be profitably invested. So anything that becomes a sort of super mega trend is going to have some bubble type aspect to it, but that doesn't mean the underlying technology is not good and valuable and important. And I think it very much is, and there's huge potential to benefit humanity if you want to be grand about it. But what is a bubble? What I think the real bubble is the AI doomerism. AI doomerism is an extreme bubble that has very few fundamentals to support it. And the one that comes up most often is automation leading to job losses. I don't think we're going to have permanent structural long-term job losses. What kind of amazes me is that even some of the AI promoters, people like Elon Musk or other people, have said, "Oh, we're going to have so many permanent job losses in the future. We'll need to have a universal basic income because half the population will be unemployed." And those are the people who are leading AI companies. So I would maybe sit down with some messaging experts, and Elon in particular probably doesn't take advice from messaging experts, but the other guys probably should. And there's two kind of examples about to maybe reassure us about why there is not going to be these huge long-term job losses. So we've had lots of big shifts in the American economy since our beginning. So if you go back to 1776 or maybe 1789 when the Constitution was ratified, about 90% of Americans back then worked in agriculture. They were farm workers. Some of them owned farms, some of them did not. But growing food and livestock was about 90% of the U.S. economy, right? Now it's, in terms of employment, it's maybe between 1% and 3%, depending on how you count that, whether you count just people who work on the land or the people who also work at the Caterpillar factory. And somehow we do not have, 87% unemployment in this country. How is that possible? All those jobs, we destroyed all of those agriculture jobs.
We also don't have 87% starvation rates either. So it's not like we've done this at the cost of food abundance. If anything, we might eat too much food as a country, potentially.
So we both have plenty of jobs, and we have more food than ever, so much that too much food is a problem for more people than it is the opposite problem. The thing is, we had a growing, vibrant, mostly market-based economy that created new jobs where the other ones were eliminated, and almost all of those jobs were better. I think by today's standards, pretty much all of them. Even if you take a micro dirty job, it's probably better than being a farmer using hand tools in the 1780s. So the question is like, well, how could a big economy possibly deal with this much structural employment change. Well, we've done it, and we don't have millions of unemployed farmers on the streets of every city in America. But the other thing is, whether it's AI or even before the term artificial intelligence was coined, automation fears go back over 100 years easily in the United States, where people said, well, these new machines are going to put us out of work. It's going to put them out of work. It's going to put this or that group out of work. And again, it hasn't. You can look at a movie which is astonishingly on point if you go back and watch it. A 1957 movie called Desk Set, which is a very charming romantic comedy starring Katharine Hepburn and Spencer Tracy. Spencer Tracy comes in to this big publishing company, and he is a sort of efficiency expert, and he installs this giant supercomputer. And it is going to do the work that the publishing company's research department used to do, which employed dozens of people. And Katharine Hepburn is in charge of that team. And everyone at the company is terrified that the machine is going to destroy all their jobs and take it away. And doing knowledge work, right? Doing the stuff people worry about AI doing today, not the sort of brutal backbreaking farm labor of days gone by, but this sort of, white-collar cognitive work. Spoiler alert, it has a good ending. So not everyone loses their job. It turns out it helps everyone do their job better and doesn't replace everyone, which is, again, a lot of AI applications going to be complementary and not exclusive to jobs that are being done now. But it also goes to show that even in 1957, there was enough worry and concern about AI displacing knowledge work that this was a hit film, right? And somehow, between 1957 and now, all of the white-collar knowledge workers of America have also not become unemployed. And we have more knowledge and knowledge exchange than ever before. So, one, the worries about, systemic job loss and economic disruption from AI, I think are overblown on the merits, even if you don't look into the deep past. But they're especially overblown if you look at the actual real-life experiments that happened with economic evolution in this country, whether it's transitioning from agriculture or transitioning from the early stage industrial economy we used to have to the economy we have today. We have an amazingly low and reasonable unemployment rate. It is not 50% or more, and there's very little reason to think it will be in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I agree completely. I think a lot of the doomerism is very much overblown. Vance, what say you? Are you an AI doomer or
No. I think it's going to be beneficial, and I agree with what Richard was saying there. And one of the things that I've been writing about and thinking about a lot lately is this idea of data centers, right? Not even an idea, but they're happening all over the place. And in Texas, they're growing by leaps and bounds. Virginia, there's a lot. That's the number one place right now. Texas, I think, will surpass Virginia soon. But there has been this doom and gloom surrounding data centers because people are saying, well, it's using all the electricity. It's using all the water, right? And I think there is some people who just don't like big tech. They don't like the tech companies, and so they're like, I don't really want data centers anyway. But I think it gets past kind of what we've been talking about the idea of abundance. So instead of thinking about how it's using so much electricity, which, by the way, they don't use nearly as much electricity as what the estimates show, because this is saying at every point in time they're using the same amount of electricity throughout the day, which they don't. And they can actually generate their own electricity because of all the servers that are within that data center. And some of them are looking at small modular reactors, having their own electricity. So it may not even be that big of an issue on the grid. And then they'll talk about water. Well, by the way, there's closed loophole waters where they're recycling most of the water they're using. They're not even using that much water, but it's a doom and gloom. It sounds rough, and especially in rural areas. In Texas, where I live, there's been a couple of data centers where they'll have it up for the permits and everything, right, for the city council. And you have protesters that would go in. I think some of these are paid by the left to come in and do this, but I think there are also people who are concerned, and they have voted them down to not get the permits. And my concern with that is that it goes into this doomerism idea that Richard did a great job talking about historically, but we're seeing this now of something that could slow down our growth, slow down the information flow. And one of the things that I think is I'm so pro AI in many ways is that I think it's also going to give us more opportunities to prosper that we never knew before. This goes back to Frederick Hayek's The Knowledge Problem, is that we only see the information that we have available today to understand how that's going to influence the labor market. And I do think that some people will be displaced. I think it's important to acknowledge that, but it doesn't mean there's not going to be any other jobs. Richard did a great job of going through agriculture and other areas, but think about when we had the horse and buggy going to the Model T. Everybody was out in arms saying, no, we can't do that. And what would have happened had we not been able to have that transformation to drive cars? I don't want to be going around in a horse and buggy or riding a horse somewhere. That's not good for, I don't want to do that. And I think right now, data centers is kind of that next area, next level of thinking, okay, well, what's the future going to be? I think it's important too, though, for us who are free marketeers, where I think there is some caution, but in my view, the caution becomes how much government is intervening, because I believe that a lot of these companies that are doing NVIDIA, like NVIDIA with semiconductor chips, these data centers, whether it's Facebook or Meta, I guess, and others, there may be some concerns that we need to deal with. But the marketplace is the best place to do that, because we can stop using data. It's funny how you see some people now protesting data centers by posting on X or posting somewhere using data that goes through the data centers to make their points. And so I think it's also about, economic illiteracy. I had Peter Boettke on my podcast recently from GMU, and we talked a lot about economic illiteracy. And I think that's something that we're missing a lot right now, is that it's a lot of emotion, it's a lot of populism, and that maybe we've talked about some here today, and that's driving a lot of this, even in the AI space, to where I'm pro AI. I think it's going to be revolutionary. I think we're already going through that revolution right now. And if you don't want to get on that train, you're going to be left way back, because this is the wave of the future. This is how kids are going to learn. I think it's going to improve education, healthcare, many other areas of our lives, and free us up. One thing that maybe we haven't talked about as much is that as part of this abundance is not just work and income, but it's leisure. The more time that we have with AI and the things that we can do, like for me, for example, my podcast, I'll use ChatGPT, Claude, a couple of them to help me write my script, to help me write different things, where before that may have taken me an hour. Now I can do it in, 5 minutes. That leaves me 55 minutes to do something else. And so I think that there's something else that we've got to think about through all this, is that how do we become better off? Let's make sure that there's not anything nefarious going on with AI. And I think that's where people are somewhat concerned about. But otherwise, let's let the market work, and let's let the laws that are on the books today work. We don't need new laws. We don't need new regulations. Everything is already out there. It's just a matter of how are we going to deal with it for the future. So I'm pro AI, and I'm hopeful that we'll have more of it in the future.
Thanks to Vance and Richard for a great conversation with the From Ideas to Innovation podcast, where we bring together innovators, academics, and policymakers. Thank you for listening. If you liked this episode, please drop a comment below, check out our show notes on Substack, and please like and subscribe this episode.